Guilt is not something you should feel when awakened to an injustice or inequality you randomly have benefited from, and you must work to reject it, because it does no one any good. And it wasn't your fault, as you didn't create the system in general. You just benefited from it, and you need to adjust. Just like how seeing someone in a wheelchair or someone who's been through a war makes one feel uncomfortable because you feel bad that you've been so sheltered from that experience, they have kind of gotten over it and just want to be treated like a normal person, with perhaps raised awareness and some concessions or respecting of some issues that they have to deal with. Persons with psychological and social issues are the same way. More often than not, they're over their experiences and have embraced it. They just want you to understand their point of view and why they need some special understanding. Unfortunately, the guilt that should not exist often creates a backlash effect that prevents cognitive dissonance, and often that person's experience is denied because the thought of that person actually going through that experience is horrible, especially if it was unwittingly helped to occur by you in your little bubble of reality. It's just like if a child of a slave owner or crown prince is told by a slave or peasant of their experience that they have all their lives helped increase their suffering. Quick rejection to prevent feelings of guilt would be the most immediate response. It's like how in the Deep South, many will still hold resentment to the North, but in the same breath complain that blacks need to just get over slavery. On top of this, the system has a positive narrative built around it that you were raised with to make everything that is happening sound good. And when that narrative is attacked, you fight back psychologically because people hold that narrative of the system as part of themselves. What one should do when their awareness is raised, instead of feeling guilt, is to first listen. Then go check out the data to see if what they say has merit. If it does, try and figure out a way to change your behavior to reduce that level of harm and raise awareness in others. However, the opportunist will use that guilt on people and generate all sorts of excuses as to why that person is trying to make their experience known, is lying, or trying to guilt them for no reason. The guilt is a natural response. The person raising awareness can't help it. It's going to happen. And the opportunist can use it to make the group putty in their hands to deny any experience of another group, who it is impossible to ever have that kind of experience. Sadly, this often puts a burden of proof on the person with a forced experience, which on top of already having been oppressed, they now have to provide evidence that they're being oppressed to overcome the guilt of the oppressors. It's even harder if this group is poor or uneducated, because they more often than not don't know the first thing about communicating or have the money to raise the awareness to many people. It often takes help from non-oppressed, which the opportunist can use to accuse of Uncle Tomming. Opportunists on the oppressed side will often use guilt and anger to push their cause, though more often than not, you can just be someone who doesn't realize perception to use guilt and anger. Either way, guilt and anger only works well in very short, tiny bursts to make a point. If guilt is used, then it requires a massive level of exposure to people to require them to change. The guilt has to be so overwhelming that they can no longer ignore the truth. The Nazi concentration camps were one of those things that, after losing a war and being pounded into their awareness by their invaders, required them to accept it about their own system. And there are always some who still don't feel like they deserve the guilt and will go to extremes such as denialism, or even convincing themselves that what happened was good, like the neo-Nazi groups in Germany and America. Which leads us to some of the most contentious topics on YouTube, and that is of feminism. Feminist issues are forced experience versus impossible to experience disconnect. I, for most of my life, had been completely unaware of the issues people with glasses had to face and inconveniences they have to go through that I don't. Same with cancer patients, little people, and even blondes who get treated to some microaggressions made as humor. Redheads have the same issue, that if you're not one of them, you'll never understand. This impossible experience bubble one can live in can completely blind you to the experiences others have, especially if it involves injustices. This can create an unintended egocentrism, or complete apathy to an issue, and when it's forced on you and you don't know much about the issue, it's easy to make an oversimplified decision about how you should react and form an opinion. Just like how I can't even fathom someone who's 3 feet tall and the everyday experiences, I was always completely oblivious to issues women had to deal with. I, for most of my adult life, considered myself one of the biggest proponents of equality with women. I will call both men and women out on what is sociologically called a microaggression, such as jokes about all women are like this, helping perpetuate stereotypes. I would also call women out who use the same jokes about men. This pervasive attitude can give people excuses when they act like that and just say, well, that's just how we are, as it helps perpetuate a myth. Giving people these kinds of excuses in the form of microaggressions can seriously help prevent social advancements. However, when it comes to the application of equality in real life, there are things someone who is not a woman cannot understand, as it doesn't directly affect them. And unless they actually listen to women, you will never be aware of it unless it's forced upon you, like some YouTube feminist activists are currently making many feel like they're interrupting their daily schedule of atheist programming and movements. While many feel like there is an interruption of their atheist outlet and the atheist movement shouldn't be muddled by the politics of feminism, feminism is hardly a disconnect from skepticism, which most atheist organizations also have in their charter, as feminism requires a questioning of the facts beyond your own experience and analysis of the data. I've never seen anyone make a complaint whenever an atheist speaker attacks the merits of homeopathy or seances. And that certainly has nothing to do with atheism. There are probably plenty of atheists who believe in those sorts of things. When I met my girlfriend, she was very pro-feminist, and I believed that she could do anything that a man could. In most areas, that's true, but she was a bit shocked when I expected her to do things like walk home alone at night or in paths that might have been shady. As a man, I never think of these things. I can do these things, and my chances of getting attacked are very low. I often just have to look and be aware, then take standard measures of safety depending on the threat level of the neighborhood. Most girls, on the other hand, have a talk similar to what young black men have, but in this case, it's how to go out of their way to be safe. There are areas or times of day they can never go alone unless they go in pairs or in a group. If they don't, they're just asking to be attacked or raped. If they go to a party, they have to be extremely over-careful with their drinking and watching their drink, that while a guy can get smashed with no guilt or repercussions, if a girl gets wasted and raped, then she probably wanted it anyway. She shouldn't have gotten drunk, the slut. It's what is called rape culture that unfortunately has been confused because of the charged language in its definition. Of course, one has to constantly remind people of the evidence that rape has nothing to do with lust and everything to do with power, and that women are more often raped by a man she knows and trusts because she feels like she can let down her awareness of her surroundings and be treated like an actual equal person. For men, especially men who consider them pro-equality, learning that they are still heavily lacking in this issue can be a bit of a shock. It can often cause some cognitive dissonance and threaten their current knowledge of feeling of moral superiority. It can create a backlash, or they can just give up because, hey, considering how hard they work on this, they can never be aware enough to do no harm. Changing overnight or giving up are not really options if you want true equality. With all of the inequality and injustice in the world, you can't just drop everything and change immediately to fit the new information. I just learned about the Indonesia apartheid last night occurring in West Papua New Guinea. I was completely unaware of because they keep such an information lockdown on the area, and our nation is complicit in the abuse. It doesn't mean I'm going to immediately change my lifestyle or read only about that. There are too many causes out there to be worked on. But I do need to keep my mind open and be more aware about the situation and the problems involved. Hell, it took me a few years to change my use of the word gay as a negative term, and it took me a bit longer to become more aware and more vocal about gay rights.